And we're live. Welcome, everyone. Yet another weekly call for the Merge Request Report Widgets working group. And I'll go straight to the announcements. So one of the efforts we have been doing is to prepare the rollout of the feature for all the widgets to go live. And in order to do that, it'd be really useful to have someone that is in the know of each widget. So last week we started an effort to identify the DRIs for each one of the widgets. And I just wanted to mention that the progress has been great. Thanks everyone who helped coming up with the names of the DRIs. I think we have pretty much everyone. We're just closing the final one, but just going to give an update that this is going to be committed to the documentation of the handbook, not necessarily the working group, because once the working group extinguishes, the DRIs will live on as the contact people for those widgets. Something happens, the widget breaks, there's an incident somewhere, somebody wants to reach out, they know who to call. And even if so this is not the same thing as being on call. It's just that we know who to nag. And if you're not online, they'll probably nag your team or your manager or whoever, right? But at least they know more or less, they have a contact person to check. For this more immediate need, for the rollout, which will be led, Phil will take care of like coordinating a little bit. He will reach out to these people to make sure that everything is covered and to have an updated situation and status. So yeah, that's the list. I'll be putting into documentation somewhere. I'll ask someone to review and merge, but that's my announcement. Questions? All right, Fernando, do you have the next one?
Sure. So this is just a follow-up from, I guess I wasn't in last meeting, but I was going to mention that license compliance is its own feature flag. So the intention of this was to allow the rest of the group to push forward with releasing all the other widgets, and license compliance is taking a little bit longer because it's basically we're waiting on some backend stuff to be added to the collapsed endpoint. So the idea being that so they're independent flags, so we can roll out all the existing widgets, and then when we're ready, we'll toggle it on for license compliance, and it looked like it was rendering correctly. A follow-up to that is that in the process of working on the widget license compliance widget extensions, I ran into, I'm going to share my screen here, a problem where I guess the polling behavior doesn't, we have an edge case essentially. So what happens is with enable polling, it looks like it polls the URL for the collapse state. And it looks like behind the scenes, it will poll until we get 200, or well, not 200, a successful status code. And then we fire the success, I guess, callback handler, and we run the code. The problem is that there are a lot of status codes that quantify as quote unquote successful. And one of them is a 204, which is no content. And as far as I know, any of the widgets that have polling enabled, well, actually, even if polling is disabled, the thing is, for the license compliance, for the secure stage widgets, they all return 204s after a pipeline run or during a pipeline while a pipeline is running. And the reason for that is, we will run a bunch of security jobs in the pipeline. And once the pipeline completes, there's like a post-processing stage where the artifacts in the pipeline are parsed. So there's this kind of window of where, we're getting the pipeline's running and we haven't parsed the results. So it's returning 204s. And what will happen is right after you create a merge request, while the pipeline's running, you'll keep seeing this loading state. And that's with polling off because it requests once. If you turn on polling, it will fail on the first poll, I think, because the 204 is no content. And what we have here is like this code snippet I had to change, or this is a proposal for making a change. But when data is undefined, we do object.keys and we call out undefined, and it would cause an exception, and then it would just fail silent. Well, it would fail, it would catch the exception and then show this error state. And this behavior applies to all the secure stage widgets. The implementation details for that are, let me dive in here real quick. So the ones that are impacted are any of the widgets that hit these endpoints, which is pretty much all the secure ones. Because you'll see for each type of report type that we hit, we call report response. And then this is the logic here. You know, if the pipeline's active, return 204 no content. If it's parsing, 204 no content. The only time it will show the 200 with actual data is after the pipeline is completed and it has run. And then sorry, I'm kind of jumping around a lot here, but does that kind of make sense so far? Is that we don't handle right now with polling enabled 204s. And there are a lot of other caveats too. It's just like, we have this notion of like a loading state and then show results, you know, your populated widget or error. In reality, we actually kind of have one additional state. So it's the initial page load, right? And then you'll show the widget loading because it has to make that initial request to the server. At that point, we don't know if the data is ready, you won't get a 200. We don't know if the server may return an error code. We don't know if it's gonna return a successful, you know, 204, but the pipeline's running. We're kind of inferring by 204 status code that like the pipeline's still running. So we kind of need an in-between state where like, okay, initial page load, show the widget loading, like, hey, you know, loading results. And then if the pipeline's running, have it returned and have it still keep spinning and say like, hey, pipeline currently running, or something along the lines of like waiting for pipeline to complete and parse results. And then when we get to 200, then we'll switch over to the actually populated widget. Because what we end up happening is if we don't do that, and let's say we apply the patch I suggested to handle the 204, basically what it's, the patch that I have, what it does essentially is if we get a successful status code, but no data, it's kind of inferring that, you know, we will just keep polling until we do have data. So when we do have data and object.keys.data is greater than 0, then we'll stop the polling. If I make that change and we don't account for a different loading state, what will happen is we'll have the initial page load. This will keep showing loading while the pipeline is running and after pipeline is completed, but we haven't parsed results yet. And what will happen is on the next poll, you know, it will show no detected license. Sorry, it will show on the 200, it'll show no licenses detected. And the next poll, it will show the updated results after the parsing. So it's kind of, you know, we kind of get this weird behavior where like, depending on when you access the page, we're going to get kind of these flaky UI states. I know I'm like kind of rushing through it, but I'm happy to do.
Thanks for presenting it. I think it does present the problem. Phil, do you have any thoughts?
I guess the two issues here is the first issue is we need to fix the polling not working when no data is returned. And I think the patch you put there should be more than good enough. I think it'll do fine. And then I guess the other issue there is then fixing the loading text. All right there.
Yeah, I'm trying to. So what I was for, and maybe I could put like a rough draft MR and then just, you know, share it with you, and then maybe we could work on finding something that works. I think this is one of those things where maybe might make sense if I just kind of put a proposal, like just a draft MR together and just kind of like approve a concept. But the idea was that we have the you could specify the strings, right, for the loading state. My proposal is that we have another one that's kind of like a string that we would show while it's getting 204s, or while it's a successful status code but with no data. The problem though is, you know, I don't know if 204 no content is standard. Like I don't know what that means in terms of like, does that always standard? Is it commonly accepted that 204 means we're waiting on data, or does that mean, something is completed, but there's no data generated? So like the behavior is also dependent on what that means to us. And that 204 no content, meaning a pipeline is still running, might be specific to how Secure is interpreting that status code and not how we're doing it at GitLab. So the problem is that the way the polling logic is implemented, when you get to that function, the handler, it doesn't have an idea of the status code. That it doesn't seem to be passed down. We just have the data. So we can't like conditionally handle like, oh, if it's a 204, do this. If it's we just know if it's successful or failure. The other,
But don't you think that we shouldn't, like, I think there's a point here where if all the secure widgets are implementing the 204, I think that's strong enough argument to support it in a way that we don't kill the polling continues. I wouldn't infer anything else from the 204 and start showing a different message. Like, we just keep the first initial loading text until the results are.
That's what I was about to say. So we fix the initial bug with the poll and not work with 204. And then I guess we go back to UX and say, do we want to change the text here? I mean, to me, whether it's parsing or loading, it still seems like it's loading, and I don't really know why we need to change the text.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a good point, and there is a reason for that. Why I suggested that intermediate step, and again, that is a UX question, and I actually pinged some UX folks here to get feedback. But the problem is, keep in mind that loading state, if you have a pipeline that runs in 20 seconds, or that it may show the results within 20 seconds. But what if you have a pipeline that's 2 hours? What we would have happen is if a user had a pipeline that ran for a long time, after you create the merge request, they would have issues where like it looks like it's broken, because what will happen is, I don't have screenshots here, but this is a user reported problem that we closed out. But basically, it would show loading, parsing results. Your pipeline may run for, let's say, 4 hours, let's say. It's going to keep showing that spinner like what is this frozen? Is it just hanging in there? So that's why like the initial page load is more of a loading, like, hey, loading, getting the status from server, kind of like that's the intention. And then the results would be,
but there still needs to be, I guess, another state then, doesn't it? Because there's not just a loading and parsing, there's a pipeline still running state.
Yeah.
The way I see that, like what we probably, if we want to have, I think that's a valid question, and I think we definitely should address it. I'm not entirely sure if it's the base widget that should address that. If we think about it, it's a 204 or whatever, when it's still preparing, it doesn't have the data. But if you want to present an information to the user that it's ongoing, it would probably be whoever has the domain knowledge to know whether it's a long or a short pipeline, and then eventually say if the pipeline has started like more than 15 seconds ago, or more than 30 seconds, more than 3 minutes, it would show a different 200 result with a message saying the report is being computed, it's taking a while. But that would be a 200 for the widget. The widget only knows it's not ready yet, it's ready yet. It's ready, here's what it is. And then the widget should be in charge of like controlling that. Because if we do that at the base level,
I see where you're going with this. So maybe the solution is to update the endpoints for secure and say, don't show a 204, instead show a 200 with maybe status field that says
pipeline running or something like that. Here's a link for it.
Because we'll know that. We already know that at the endpoint, because we know enough to say it's a 204. So maybe the solution is leave the widgets as they are, do a 200 at the secure endpoints, and then with the field, it's just, add a status field, and it could be pipeline running. And then from there, we could, because otherwise we're kind of baking in assumptions into the base widget.
The base widget, yeah.
Okay. I'll take that feedback to the team then.
Thanks for caring for the details, Fernando. I think this really matters for the end user experience. So, but the decisions are the engineering domain. So thanks for bringing it up, for sure.
I did have, I guess that might make the I just wonder if we have time to go through this one. This one maybe not so relevant now that we're going maybe the route of doing the 200 with the status of the pipeline. But had we stayed with accounting for the 204, what would have happened is that we have two endpoints, right? We have the collapse and uncollapsed. And the intention there is that they're similar endpoints, but they're different. One only shows enough information for the summary view, which is more condensed. You don't want to fetch all the things if you don't expand the widget, right? So when we had two different widgets, and again, this might be secure specific, so we may not want to handle it, but for the license compliance endpoint, we had the collapse and uncollapse, and they show the difference is that one shows just the count of licenses, and the other one returns the array of licenses. So because we do these post-processing parsing that happens after the pipeline run, we cache those results because we don't want to keep reparsing every time we hit the endpoint, because they're both different endpoints. If we had solved the 204 problem originally, then we would pull until we have data for the collapsed state. For the uncollapsed state, when you expand the widget, it would make a new request. Yeah. Because those are the caching works at the endpoint level, because they're technically two different URLs. We would have the 204 no content and a cache miss again on the expanded state. So the question was there enough justification to add the ability to pull the expanded state? Because right now, if you do enable the polling, it only will have the polling behavior for the collapsed endpoint and the data that goes for the collapsed endpoint, not for the expanded one. So I don't know if
yeah, that's an interesting question. Did you face this, Phil, or is it the first time that a widget needs this?
I think it's the first time a widget needs it.
Okay.
It's a tricky problem though, because if you think about it, that payload is by definition large-ish. If you want to pull for those, the endpoint needs to be prepared to not needs to be prepared.
Oh yeah, and then and you don't want to have requests stacking up or just keep
polling. Request 4 megabytes every polling step, right?
Sure. I think we don't have to I think now, based off of the fact that if we're going to rework it to do a 200 and add a field that's just like pipeline status, I don't think we'll have to do this one or the other one, because we're shifting to the back end, providing providing the data we need in the way we need it.
Yeah.
Okay. The only thing I will say then, with that said, regardless of which approach we take, even though I'm leaning towards the back end being reworked, there are some implications there. I don't know, if that would be a breaking change. I don't know. I have to double check if these APIs are external or internal.
Sure.
And deprecate the, because we're changing the response and how it works. And I don't know, we may have, if it's a breaking change, we just released 15.0. So the concern now is that with any of the secure stage widgets, even the ones that are merged into master now, that aren't behind an individual feature flag, they'll still exhibit this behavior, because until we handle 204s, if we don't do anything about those, then
I think we can do that. I think supporting 204 sounds like a doable change.
Okay.
Makes sense. It's a success code. Maybe even we could accept any 200 code, because any 200 code in HTTP is success. Maybe.
Okay.
So we could do that.
I guess what I'm saying is, without that, and even if we handle it, that's cool. But without that, the secure stage widgets that aren't behind individual feature flags would end up having this kind of error state.
Okay.
It's the thing is, why we didn't catch in development, it's because it was kind of, the root cause of it was kind of confusing. I spent like a week trying to figure it out, but the thing is, if you refresh the page, it will load just fine. So in the development stage, you may see this occasionally and be like, oh, maybe it's network latency or something. You refresh and it's gone. The reason for that is because on the second load, it's already, that endpoint was cached and you don't get a 204 anymore. So the criteria are very specific. It's like right after you create a merge request, while the pipeline's running, or if you have a merge request that hasn't had that page loaded, I think the cache, it's a couple hours. So like if you go away from your computer, come back and refresh the page, you would see that exception one time and you refresh the page, like what the heck's going on, or try to debug it and it's gone. So that's why it was like one of those bugs that would kind of come and go until we realized it's like, oh, okay, it's this 204. So, so to summarize, the secure widgets that aren't behind the feature flag now, if we don't accommodate for 204, we should flag them out separately, or which sounds easier is to support the 204 and the proposed and the my attempt here, like here's the patch. It's very simple. The only thing to keep in mind and why I rolled it back from an MR I was merging in is because I didn't want to hold up my other MR. The only thing to keep in mind is that because if the data is empty, it starts pulling again. There are some unit tests that have to be kind of updated to mock out for that, because what would happen is those unit tests would hang because they would keep pulling. In particular, the unit test that test the loading state would hang because when I made this change, so I didn't finish updating all those unit tests. So that's like one gotcha. And here's an example of that. So we have this like metrics extension and it does the initial loading, but it continues to pull in the background and the test kind of hangs because it's still pulling. So we have to then, after we do the test assertion, kind of return 200 eventually so that the test resolves. I don't know, maybe there's another way we mock it out better, but, and these are all the, when we make that change, we probably want to make sure that handling 204 doesn't cause any regressions for all these other widgets that uses polling, is my suggestion. But
because it feels like a proper issue, like a proper effort, not just something we hammer it out. So we're already closed off for feature 15.0. We might put this on for 15.1 if somebody wants. If you want to get something together before that, Fernando, we're happy to review it. But it sounds like the 204 support is a no-brainer. Seems like a fair thing to do. It's just that it's a little bit more involved in just adding the little.
sure, I think for the rollout strategy is the plan when it. Because I feel like. And if anyone doesn't feel the same, let me know. But just to be sure, I feel like this
Is a blocker.
A blocker, yeah. Or if we still want to push forward with all the other widgets, we have to flag out the secure ones.
Yeah, I think either one of the two will have to take into account on the rollout. I'll add Phil, can you add a comment to the rollout issue about this? Just saying that we're tackling this 204. You can link to that comment that Fernando left. So yeah, you have the issue for the rollout.
Quick question on this: are we sure that this only affects the secure issues?
That's a good point. We may want to ask the other groups to be like, hey, are you sure you always get 200s? I don't know. I can't speak for the other groups. I don't know what their endpoints look like, but I would be inclined to say no, but you never know. So,
yeah,
well, if we do it, we just cover every case because the 204 is a success code. So even if they use it, as long as they're respecting the nature of the HTTP code, we should be covered. But so far I haven't seen that happen. Otherwise, you would have picked up before. But yeah, I think this is just another example of making the code more robust of the base widget. Where whatever happens in the future, somebody might use this code as well, you'll be covered. So thanks for that.
Yeah, and as a follow, I'll have to bring up, because this affects all the analyzers. So we have multiple analyzer groups within Secure Stage. I'll have to bring it up at the stage level meeting. I'll CC my manager and see if I could get some support from him to kind of.
Yeah, if the thing that we talked about, having a 200 giving a message about the things being like cooked or whatever, it might be an option to create a separate endpoint that it's more like verbose or intermediate state or something, to not replace this with the breaking change.
Oh yeah, like so you're saying keep the existing endpoint, add a new one, and then
eventually on 16.0 roll this back, just to destroy that endpoint or something, if we want to, or just keep both endpoints going, whatever.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, I'll take that feedback.
Sure.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna comment some of the
Good.
proposals here, so we don't lose that. That's all I have in.
No, this is great. Thanks for bringing it up. And we're out of points in the agenda. Anybody has any other points to discuss? Yeah, so Phil, next week, there should be a bit more information on the rollout on this particular thing of the 204s and everything. But from what I can see, the rollout should then be happening sometime in 15.1, right? Not right away in 15.0. Okay, makes sense to me. All right. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. See you next week.